Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Chaos is raging in America's cities, with crime skyrocketing across the nation. Little children are dying in our streets, including a one-year-old gunned down in a drive-by shooting over the weekend. So why are city leaders trying to defund the police? And what action is President Trump taking in response? Dale Hurd has the answers.
Several large U.S. cities are seeing a sharp rise in crime and misery after the George Floyd riots. Their response to the growing lawlessness? Defund the police. Just last night, a 9-year-old boy in New Orleans died when 4 people were hit in a drive-by shooting. In Brooklyn, New York last night, 5 people were shot in another drive-by after a 1-year-old baby boy was killed over the weekend. At a White House law enforcement roundtable Monday, President Trump criticized city leaders who want to defund the police at a time when inner-city crime is soaring. He said what he called radical politicians running American cities are waging war on innocent Americans, and that his administration is pro-police and anti-crime.
You look at what's going on in Minneapolis, you look at what's going on in many Democrat-run areas. But they want to defund and they want to abolish. Far-left mayors are escalating the anti-cop crusade, and violent crime is spiraling in their cities.
The president has come under fire for denying a request from Minnesota's governor for federal funds to rebuild parts of Minneapolis that were destroyed during the George Floyd riots. More than 1,500 buildings were damaged by looting and rioting, resulting in over $500 million in damages. But it's not without precedent. In 2015, the Obama White House denied aid to the state of Maryland after rioting in Baltimore over the death of Freddie Gray, a black man who died in police custody. In Seattle, the city council wants to cut the police budget in half. The mayor says that's too much, but still wants a 20% cut, totaling some $96 million.
They haven't even talked to the chief of police.
It is reckless to advocate for this type of cuts.
President Trump pointed out that in New York City, shootings were up 358%. And he said the city of Chicago was more dangerous than Afghanistan, at a time when police have been demonized.
Reckless politicians have defamed our law enforcement heroes as the enemy. They call them the enemy. They actually go and say they're the enemy, and even call them an invading army.
CBN News chief political correspondent David Brody told CBN's Faith Nation program the president's law and order emphasis will resonate with most voters in this fall's election.
Most people in this country, you would think, want to feel safe. Most people believe that, for the most part, law enforcement is doing good out there. And I think that's where this president is trying to take the conversation. But he also believes electorally and politically that that's a winning hand, ultimately, in terms of the safety of the American people come November.
Trump vowed that crime numbers will go down, even if he has to, quote, go in and take over cities, unquote. That law and order message may be working. Recent polls show he's cut Joe Biden's lead in half. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
My prediction is just as sure as anything that's going to win the election for him. People want to be safe, and mothers don't want their children shot in drive-by shootings. And when you see the numbers of people killed in Chicago over the weekend, are just appalling. And the fact that Seattle is a no-cop zone, and they've destroyed a whole area of the city. They've raised taxes to try to build back, and they ask for federal money, and Trump says no way. And so Biden's lead may be cut in half, but I think come the election, it's going to be a totally different scene. I mean, you mark my word, Trump will ride law and order to victory, and the left is just playing into his hands and giving him this. Well, in other news, rolling back their reopenings. That's what some states are doing where the coronavirus is spiking. That includes the state of California. John Jessup has that story from our news bureau in Washington.
That is right, Pat. California is going back into lockdown mode. Governor Gavin Newsom shutting down indoor gatherings, including bars, restaurants, gyms, and churches. This after new daily cases of the coronavirus increased more than 20% and deaths went up more than 10%. The Los Angeles and San Diego school districts announcing that they will start the new school year online, keeping some 800,000 students at home for now. District leaders say they're planning to allow kids back in the classrooms as the public health conditions improve. The government's Dr. Anthony Fauci says he's still hopeful we could see a vaccine by the beginning of the new year.
We're pretty cautiously optimistic that at the end of the year, beginning of this coming 2021, we will have one and maybe more, I hope more than one vaccine that would be available.
And it's not just California that's putting on the brakes. Arizona, Texas, Michigan, and Florida are also reinstating some restrictions on public gatherings. Florida has seen the most dramatic rise in coronavirus cases. Recently, Lori Johnson spoke to a doctor there who points out that the death rate still remains low. He also explained why the virus affects some people more harshly than others.
Doctors say when a person becomes infected with COVID-19, their blood type can make a big difference in how sick they get.
This is kind of a curious thing, but if you have A positive blood type, you probably have about a 30% greater chance of ending up in the hospital than if your blood type is O.
Young people tend to avoid hospitalization, and that's largely who's testing positive, causing the death rate to plummet.
From at 1.5% to about at this point, as of today, 1.5% in the state. And in Tampa, in Hillsborough County, it's actually below 1%. It's about 0.9%. So that's one of the lowest case fatality rates on the planet, quite literally.
School children carry the lowest risk of both acquiring the infection and becoming very ill.
For the most part, I think schools should reopen. There's some areas of the state where I may not be quite as enthusiastic, but for the most part, I think that we are going to be okay.
Hospitals reportedly made it past the peak.
We know that emergency room visits for COVID-like illnesses and influenza-like illnesses are dropping. And that's the first sign that things may be improving.
Doctors now rely on treatments they didn't have before, such as remdesivir and the affordable dexamethasone, both scientifically proven to work. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thanks, Lori. Some staggering numbers on the state of the United States economy. The budget deficit jumped to a record $864 billion last month. That's almost as much as the deficit for all of 2019. The Congressional Budget Office predicts the gap between government spending and income could reach $3.7 trillion by the end of the 2020 fiscal year. It could get even bigger if Congress agrees to another round of emergency spending to keep the economy afloat during the crisis. Small businesses are getting hit the hardest. Data from the online service Yelp shows 66,000 businesses, Pat, have closed up shop since March 1st.
Well, without question, somebody sometime is going to have to pay off those debts. And we are mortgaging the economy. It's unbelievable the amount of money that's being spent. I mean, it's wild and reckless. And sooner or later, we'll either have to pay off the debt or we'll have to default. And if we default, the dollar and the United States will become like Argentina, and we don't want that to happen. But it's a serious matter, and I think they're spending like there's no tomorrow, and there is a tomorrow, and tomorrow will come a lot sooner than we think. John?
Pat, the economy, of course, will play a huge part in the presidential election, and white evangelical Christian voters make up some of the president's most ardent supporters. This even as recent polling shows approval for the president slipping among white evangelicals amid the COVID pandemic and protests over racial injustice. According to a new Pew Research Center study, around 72% of white evangelical Protestants approve of the president's handling of his job as commander-in-chief. That's down 6 percentage points from 78% in April. Even with approval numbers slipping, 8 in 10 white evangelical voters, Pat, say they plan to vote for Trump in November.
Well, the evangelical support is the base of his entire electoral margins. And just like the labor unions were the heart of the Democrat machine, whatever it was, the evangelicals are the heart of Trump's machine. But he's got to expand the base way beyond that. And the biggest thing he can do right now is to stop tweeting and stop talking about health care, which he has shown a dismal lack of knowledge of. And I think the important thing is to just defer to his health experts and lay the burden on them, not try to take the lead on some of these things. But law and order will carry him into the White House. Once he's in the next time, that's when the real crunch is going to come. And I just ask our viewers, please pray for the president for wisdom and protection after the election.